Well, thank you for coming, everybody. My name is Wynn Flint, and we're at the February 27th, 2022 meeting of Solidarity Lowell. We're going to have a moment of silence in solidarity with the Ukraine for about a minute. Can you hear me, Chris?
Yes, I can.
Okay. I think that Amy said she was going to put something in the chat, a list of organizations that you could help Ukraine with. Was that accurate, Amy?
Here it goes.
Okay, great. Some of the organizations are UNICEF, Doctors Without Borders, and International Committee of the Red Cross. Later on, Sabrina, who has a connection to Ukraine, will be sharing a personal perspective. Guidelines for our virtual meetings. It's being recorded. You'll be put on the YouTube channel. By staying in the meeting, you agree to be recorded. Use a raise hand or type an asterisk into the chat if you want to speak. The stacker for this meeting is Amy, and she will call attention to the order and call on you in return. The timekeeper is Lisa Arnold. Please be mindful of time limits. Use the stop video if you need to take a break from sharing your screen. Start video when you're ready to return. Step up, step back, and please speak slowly. Probably slower than what I'm doing. Okay. Tonight we're going to have a brief attendee intros. We'll do some Solidarity Lowell news and committee updates. Then we'll talk about allied organizations. At 6 o'clock, we'll have Sabrina talk to us about her experience with what's going on in Ukraine. And at 6:10, we'll have Alexandra Chandler. And then at 6:55, we'll have the wrap up. So this is where we introduce ourselves. We want to know your name, your pronouns, where you live, and give us a sentence or two about a pet you had, have, or would like to have. And I'll start with myself. My name is Wynn Flint. I'm she and her, and I live in Lowell on Christian Hill. And I've been a foster parent for cats, and we usually get the sick cats. They all have issues. And I've learned how to give medicine to a cat, which is pretty weird. You bump them up in a little burrito. Anyway, so we've had some wonderful cats, cats have personalities, in case you didn't know. They're all different personalities. So anyway, that's enough about me. Someone else, Chris?
Okay, I'm going to then follow next. Chris Offerman, she, her, hers. I live in downtown, and I've had lots of cats in my life, but the one that'll always stick with me was the first one in this country. He was part Manx, so he had a little stubby tail, orange stripes, and very tall hind legs. So we used to call him a cabbit, a cat rabbit. He was also an attack cat. Dogs were scared of him, so Pete will live in my memory forever. Okay, and since Wynn can't see everybody, I said I'm going to call the order. So next I see is Marissa.
Hi everyone, Marissa DuPont, she, her, hers. I currently live in Pawtucketville, but as of March 11th, I will live in Sacred Heart. Thank you. And I guess I will talk about my current cat, Nikita, whose nickname is Mistress Munch of Munchington from the distant land of Munchville. She will be 18 in May. And we're very proud of her, but we're a little worried about the move, but she'll be all right.
Okay, next one on my screen is Paul.
Hi, everyone. Paul Gaudette from Highlands and he, him. I'm with Merrimack Valley Project. We never really had pets. I'm not a pet person, but I've lived with cats. I've lived with birds. I've lived with dogs. I'm happy to see them run free and rather than be pets.
Okay, Amy.
Hey, Amy Baranowski. I live downtown. Pronouns are she, her, hers. We live with 2 kitties. I am going to talk about Pigpen because he actually has a very special week this week. He's been dealing with lymphoma, but this week he goes for his final treatment.
Okay,
My name is Ryan Hammond, pronoun he, him, and his. I also live downtown with Amy. And I'm also semi in charge of Pigpen. And so far, he has been cancer-free for the last couple of checkups, I believe now. And he's been doing much better overall.
excellent. Okay, Dee.
There, I couldn't unmute myself. Dee Halzak, she, her. I live in the acre right near University Crossing. I don't have any pets at the moment. Probably my favorite pet growing up was a parakeet, a green parakeet named Buster Bozo, who used to be allowed to fly around free in the house from time to time and would come and perch on our soup dishes on Sunday. So that's it.
Okay, Lisa.
Okay, my name is Lisa. She, her, hers. I live in downtown, and I've had lots of pets over the years, most of which don't seem to last very long because my stepfather was a veterinarian who brought home pets that were on their last legs, and we would give them a nice respite in their last days. But I did have one cat that was named Snowball, who was gray and had a nice little white patch on his neck, which is where I gave him the name Snowball, but everybody kept calling him Dirty Snowball. So they were wrong. I was right.
Okay, Rick.
Rick Golden. I live up on Christian Hill. He, him, his. And we apparently have a pet woodpecker in the trees in our backyard, and he's already back. I'm assuming he's a he. Maybe I shouldn't do that. They are already back in February. They peck at 7 a.m. right outside our window. And we have an old stovepipe on our house. And in April, they peck on the stovepipe, which sounds like a jackhammer. And I put a box with foil over the stovepipe so that he gets scared away and they get scared away. And I was pondering this and complaining about it. And then I realized, you know, what if woodpeckers hung out in groups of 50 or 60 or 100 in the same trees? So I shouldn't really complain about one pet woodpecker.
Excellent. Okay, Jay.
Hi, my name is Jay Mason. I'm the chair of the Lowell Sustainability Council. I am a dedicated environmentalist and interested in things, all things sustainable about the city of Lowell. I have a cat. Her name is Jessie, and she's just a little bit shy of being a kitten. She's about 9 months now, and she is a bundle of joy. We love having her in our family. He, him are my pronouns.
Thank you. And now all my pictures moved around again. Marissa, did you go already?
Yes.
Okay, thought so. Diana.
Hi, I'm Diana Marcus. She, her, hers. I live directly downstairs from Lisa. So, hi, Lisa. This is Princess, who comes to every Zoom meeting, including the ones with my students. And She definitely does not like me paying more attention to the computer than herself. But my students right now are actually creating their perfect pet. So I let them know what I really wanted was a miniature dragon. So that one, because they're super cool, and two, because I need someone to help me toast marshmallows.
Okay, John.
John Grossman. I live in Pawtucketville on the river. He, him. We have 2 dogs. Like Paul, I was never a pet person, but I have been around them a lot. Finally starting to understand their importance and struggling to figure out what their rights might be.
Okay, Judith.
Hi, Judith Durant, she, her. I live in the Highlands. I have for the last 4.5 years been chair of the Lowell Democratic City Committee. That's about to change. Pre-COVID, I like to travel a lot. I did travel a lot and often spontaneously, and therefore I do not have pets because it would be totally unfair. I have houseplants, and if they die while I'm gone, I just get new ones. Thanks.
Okay. Joe.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Joe Boyle. I live in the Highlands, he, him. My first cat was an old boy who was stray living behind the place my sister worked, and we adopted him. He was a very large gray tomcat who had 3 teeth, and we named him Sarge because he was old and had stripes.
Okay, David and Karen.
Hi, I'm Karen Gray, she, her, hers. We live in Stowe, Massachusetts, and we became acquainted with Alexandra when she was running for the House, and we're very impressed with her. So when we saw that she was going to be speaking, we thought we could maybe join you.
Great.
And this is my husband.
Yeah, David Gray, he, him. And I was going to say we don't have a pet now, but we've also very much enjoyed the birds here. So it's been nice to see them.
Thank you. And happy that you could join us. Lauren.
Hi, I'm Lauren Young, she, her, hers. I live in the Highlands and I have 2 cats, and I've had other cats before, and I am just as shy of a crazy cat lady. So no problems with that.
Okay. Ron.
Hi, I'm Ron Peastree. I live about a block away from Wynn. My pronouns are he, his, him. And my favorite pet was a dog named Frodo, who was an utter mutt, but was also the most intelligent dog or cat that I've ever met. And he proved that by saving my youngest brother's life at one point, but that's a story for a different time.
Yes, thank you. Olivia.
Hi, Olivia Luckett, she, her, hers, joining you all also because I saw the blurb about your meeting and your speaker this evening in the IMC newsletter. So happy to be joining you all and meeting some new folks. As far as pets go, I have had pets all my life, mostly dogs. One cat who came to us a little later in her life and had a reputation as kind of an angry girl, but it turns out she was just sick, needed a little bit of help, and then turned into a little cuddler. And so she makes me always want to have another cat. I just haven't had the opportunity to adopt the right one yet.
Okay, thank you. Jennifer. Jennifer Hill. Okay, go on to the next one. I'm Mitch Paulin.
Hey there, my name's Mitch Paulin. he, him. I live in the acre with my wife and our 4 cats. One feral, one from a pet store, and 2 we got from friends who couldn't take care of them. So yeah, I thought I'd poke my head in here today. So hey, everybody.
Hi. Okay, Nicole.
Hello, I'm Nicole McLean. She, her are my pronouns. From Lynn, Massachusetts. Was invited by Chris, so that's why I'm here, and I'm interested to hear what's going on during the meeting. So thank you for inviting me. As far as pets, I have a dog, but I don't claim him as mine because I'm not really a dog person or a pet person. My husband has a dog, and his name is Sin. He's really cute, and we've had him for about 4 months now.
Thank you. Linda.
Good evening. My name is Linda. My pronouns are she, her. I live in downtown Lowell, and I was just thinking, I used to have a cat when I was first married. We had a little black kitten whose name was Rasputin, and we had a dog who later lost one leg as a puppy whose name was Igor.
Thank you. Linda, since you only have your first name on there and I have several Lindas on my list here, could you tell me which one you are?
Cantor.
Oh, you. Okay. Hi, Linda Cantor. Now I know who you are. Okay, I think the last one was Jennifer Hill. I guess Jennifer can't talk right now. Did I forget anybody? No? If anybody hasn't introduced themselves, yes, please speak up. Okay, Wen, back to you.
A little bit about Solidarity Lowell. We're a volunteer-based group of community members of Greater Lowell working towards social justice by defending the human rights, dignity, and equality of all persons against hate and discrimination. We always welcome new members. The Solidarity Lowell Coordinating Committee is your elected team of volunteers running the meetings, organizing events, disseminating relevant news, and sharing calls to action. Elections are held every April, and more details will be in our March meeting. Solidarity Lowell is a chapter of Progressive Massachusetts. Progressive Mass is a statewide member-driven grassroots organization committed to fighting for a vision of shared prosperity, racial and social justice, good government, and environmental sustainability in Massachusetts. Visit progressivemass.com or contact us after meeting to learn more. The latest news, Progressive Mass members overwhelmingly voted to endorse Sonia Chang Diaz for governor and Tammy Gouvier for lieutenant governor. We want to celebrate some victories. Commander Billy Farrell took command of Old Ironsides, and its 80 crew members as its first female commander. The National Women's Soccer League Players Association ratifies the first collective bargaining agreement in women's soccer history, and they're getting a lot of back pay. Progressive Mass met its signature goal for Fair Share Amendment pledge cards, and the House passed H 4461, the Work and Family Mobility Act, with a vote of 120 to 36. Representatives Howard and Mom are co-sponsors. Representatives Golder and Arcier also voted yes for United Greater Lowell delegation. And I know that Paul Godet is here. He and Merrimack Valley Partnership played a big part in that. Who else has victories they'd like to share? None? All right. Join Solidarity Lowell Upbeat on Facebook for more information. Does Dee want to talk to us about the election subcommittee?
Sorry, we had one more person who was asking for a link to the meeting. Our endorsement policy, we tend to endorse for local races, but for statewide races, we follow Progressive Mass endorsements. So, but we do allow candidates to attend our meetings and get 2 minutes to introduce themselves. Beyond that, we are working on a scorecard for the city council so that as things progress through the current council season, every meeting we will record records on what motions have been made and be able to give our members a sense of how council members stood in terms of our values when it comes times to be choosing the next councilors. We've just gotten started with that, and we're getting caught up on the meetings that have been held. Lisa, do you have anything else to add?
You covered it all, but yeah, definitely for the local races, for people who are running in and near our district, we do want to hear from those people. So,
Did you want to talk about the thing that Nancy Green had set up for March?
I am unaware of anything set up for March. Someone else want to take that?
yeah, we're doing a joint elections, Lowell Progressive Elections Committee with Solidarity Lowell, as well as a couple of other organizations. And Nancy Green is heading that up. So Nancy Green was formerly a part of the Progressive Democrats of Lowell. And so we're getting together to figure out what our next steps are, but definitely want to collaborate as widely across Lowell as we can.
So if folks are interested in that, should they contact you and Dee?
Yes, either myself or Dee. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Now we're going to talk about support for our asylum seeker friend Marius. You want to talk about this, Marissa?
Yes. So Marius, for the folks who aren't familiar, he is an asylum seeker from Togo who has been staying in a sanctuary space for the past too long, it seems. We've been trying to obviously support him while he searches for a job, and he's run into hurdle after hurdle after hurdle, and has finally gotten a visa and has finally gotten a job. And the new news is that he was working for Comcast, but as we all know, Comcast is terrible. And they basically forced him to quit. So that's fun. But he acquired a van and is now driving for Amazon, but recently realized that he needs very, very badly a hydraulic lift for the van because it's just too much to deal with all the packages by himself. And I think because he's had a gap in employment, I think he's still going to need help with rent money for March. So if anyone is able to assist, we would greatly appreciate it. We're hoping that he will be able to stand on his own 2 feet very, very soon, which, you know, he's excited about, we're excited about. But I think he's just going to need a little more assistance through March, and then hopefully he'll be on his own. But yeah, my Cash App and Venmo are on the screen. If you want to write a check, just shoot me an email, marissa@solidaritylowell.com, or send me a private message and I can give you my address, and just mail me a check, and I will pass it along. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marissa. This is a time where we have allied groups share their updates and announcements. Come on, 350. I know you've been doing stuff.
Okay, I'll take that cue. This is John Grossman, along with Wynn and several other folks. I volunteer with 350 Mass, the Lowell chapter. That's a climate justice group trying to help do what we can to deal with the climate crisis here locally in Lowell area and in Massachusetts. One of the things we're working on is helping people to make their homes more energy efficient and trying to make that a possibility for regular people, not necessarily just homeowners and not necessarily just people with extra money. To that end, we're happy to report that the city of Lowell has applied and has received, I believe, a grant to hire someone to assist residents of Lowell in accessing the programs that exist. We're working to try to improve those programs, both on a statewide basis and locally. And if folks here have ideas about, there's a number of other things we're talking about in terms of making Lowell more ready to address the climate crisis, both to live with it and to do what we can to transition to renewable energy here. If you have ideas or thoughts on that, put them in the chat. Let us know. I'll put our email in the chat. We meet every other Wednesday. We're meeting this Wednesday at 7 at LTC and also on Zoom. And anybody who's interested in getting involved could let me know.
Thanks, John. No one else
When
today?
Merrimack Valley Project is going to be partnering with groups around the election and the Fair Share Amendment and other progressive proposals. We're in the stages now of working with Democracy Hubs and a group called Delivering on Equity to get trainers ready to train volunteers on gathering signatures, pledge cards, phoning, texting, and canvassing, and all the rest. So we're at the initial stages of pulling that together, hopefully over the next several months leading up to the election.
Thanks, Paul. Got some other folks? All right.
Hi, this is Jay Mason. Lowell Sustainability.
Hang on, Jay, let me get back to, I don't know how we happened here. How did that, oh, yeah, there we go. Go ahead, Jay, sorry.
Hi, this is Jay Mason. I'm with the Lowell Sustainability Council. We work closely with 350 MA of Greater Lowell and John and Wynn and everybody. And we are in the halls of government. We are a city manager appointed organization. So we have an opportunity to provide counsel to the city for sustainability in terms of policy, practice, and education. We're working on recycling issues, community choice aggregation, heat island effect, energy efficiency, electrification, bicycle pedestrian mobility, solar on the Lowell High School, as well as other city buildings, and a net zero code initiative is gathering some steam. So we'd love to have people participate. This is open to the public. It's the fourth Thursday of every month. So that would be March 24th would be our next meeting. It's a hybrid meeting. So you can attend on Zoom or attend at the City Hall in the Mayor's Reception Room, 6:30 p.m. And don't hesitate to reach out to me with any questions or ideas. Thank you.
Jay, are you still looking for more members for the board or the committee?
Yes, we are. We have a
Okay.
recent opening.
Okay, great. So anybody who lives in Lowell, take note.
Absolutely. Thank you, Wynn.
Okay. We good?
Yes.
So now we're going to hear from Sabrina, who has a connection to Ukraine.
Wynn, could you stop sharing screens so Sabrina can get in the middle?
Oh, hi. So I'm Sabrina Heisey, she, her. I did not introduce myself. I wasn't sure if I was supposed to, but I have cats. My family has adopted a teenager from Ukraine actually in 2021. So our connection to Ukraine, I just wanted to share a little bit about her story without too much detail as it's sort of personal. Ira is my daughter, she's 15, and her brother Kola is 20. They're from Mariupol, Ukraine, which is the Donetsk Oblast, which is like the Donetsk region, which is Eastern Ukraine, right on the Russian border. Half their family is ethnically Russian, half ethnically Ukraine, because the borders have been, were long open between the two countries. And In 2014, there was a war in Ukraine, right there in the Donetsk Oblast, in Mariupol. They're actually from a small village near Mariupol. And their parents and grandparents were killed. And from there, they entered into the orphanage system. In Ukraine, prior to this war, there were about 100,000 orphans in actual orphanages. Many of them social orphans from lack of economics, lack of good jobs, alcoholism, were common, drugs, lots of different reasons, but mostly social orphans, though mine were actually wartime orphans. So after that, it was just the two of them left. So they entered into the orphanage. And in Ukraine, they have a couple of interesting adoption rules. Number one, no siblings can ever be separated. So not half siblings. So if you come from a family with 5 kids, it's either all 5 get adopted or 0 get adopted. So they don't split them up like they do here under any circumstance by law. And the other interesting fact about Ukrainian adoption is incredibly unique in that the kids actually have to agree to their own adoption. So if you come meet them and they don't like you, they can say no. And in fact, many do. And so Kola and Ira actually did say no to several families, Ukrainian, and later on Ira, when she was left after he aged out, she said no to many American families too, actually, interestingly. So that's actually a really unique and interesting system, which we do not have here, where the kids have to consent to their own adoption and they have the power. So that's kind of a nice thing for them to be able to pick as well. When kids reach 15, you're lucky if you get to 16. When you reach about 15 in Ukraine, you quote, like graduate, right? So then you are out of the orphanage at that point. So Kola, when he reached 15, was sent out from the orphanage, and his choices were homelessness or the military. That's it. There was no family, there's no money. So those were his 2 choices. And he chose the military, which in Ukraine doesn't really pay very much, but it keeps you fed. And that was the goal at the moment. Sorry, I'm trying to do this with a toddler. So then at that point, Ira is legally considered a single child now because nobody else is adoptable. And she comes to America on a hosting group. So that's something interesting about Ukraine too, is that they'll take orphans and bring them to do different countries for hosting. They'll do they'll come and you take them to the dentist because they don't have dental care there. You take them to the eye doctor. They don't have eye doctors. They do their best with what they have, but it's not much. So we met Ira through a hosting group. We actually were not supposed to host her. We were supposed to host a different kid who couldn't get a visa at the last minute. So we ended up hosting her, and we were told she's not interested in being adopted. And that was great because we were not interested in adopting anyone. We just thought, oh, isn't this nice? We'll host a kid for Christmas. We'll have an extra kid in our house for Christmas. That'll be fun. And it was really fun. But it turned into an adoption that turned into us going twice last year to Ukraine to pick her up. So our first time there, it was Christmas, relatively very quiet. Christmas is in January in Ukraine because it's Eastern Europe, Eastern Orthodox, and relatively quiet. So we had no problems getting in and out of Mariupol. Everything was open. Everything was festive. Beautiful country, great food, really nice people, not a lot of economy, a lot of unemployment, but the people are, very safe the first trip. And then the second trip back, there was a border escalation with Russia while we were there, not obviously like what's going on now, but so it became military checkpoint. Where are you going? What are you doing? Because we were literally, Mariupol is right on the border. So what are you doing here? Basically was a lot of what we heard. But again, we got in, we got out. We said our goodbyes to Kola. It's a very, very strong sibling bond that they have. So she would never have gone if he didn't give her his blessing to go. They are all they have left of each other in the whole world. So their whole extended family was gone as well in the 2014 war, including their grandparents. So they are it, and they are very tightly wung together. And he's a really good brother, and he could have picked a lot of paths. So the military was, you know, we're really proud of him, and she's very proud of him. Sorry. So she is now here, and there's been a lot going on where she's from. Mariupol is a port city, so there's a lot of Russian aggression and interest in taking Mariupol. It's a mineral rich area. There's a lot of factories that produce things, and you know, they need it to make Russia connect land-wise between, you know, the Russian border and the Crimean region. There's two major cities they have to take. One of them is Mariupol, the other is Berdyansk, which they took yesterday. So Mariupol's like the last one right now that they haven't yet taken. Kola is fighting in Mariupol right now. We heard from him yesterday. And the situation is very dire now. I mean, think about it. At first, in any kind of a serious situation, how long would your groceries last? We're at the point where people's groceries are not lasting anymore. There's no more deliveries coming through, and the food is very scarce. The orphanage where Ira and Kola were from today was blown up by a Russian missile. And one of the people who handled her adoption was shot in the street. He was 65. So it is just terrifying for us, for her. We've been collecting money just to send to Kola because just to even buy, cash is king. There's nothing else. That's it. There's no organization where they are that you can, you know, like donate to that's giving out food. There is no food right now. They're lucky in that there's some agriculture nearby that people are able to, you know, there's some growth of vegetables. A lot of these smaller villages most people grow their own food still anyway. So at least people in the countryside are going to do a little bit better than people in the city. But the kids are, I mean, there's no more money for food. There's nowhere out. You cannot get out of Eastern Ukraine. There's one road in and out, and it is taken by the Russians. There is no evacuation. They're nowhere near a border. There's no Poland is close by. Most people do not own a car. Most people, when they travel there, are reliant on the very well-run, actually, train system, which is now not running. So if you are a regular person living a normal middle or, you know, lower class life, if you're not very, very rich, you don't have a car. So there isn't a way out for you. So it's, you know, it's all hands on deck fighting right now. They're fighting in the streets. The orphans that we've talked to there that Ira is still friends with, many of her friends are still there, are hiding in basements and bomb shelters. And sometimes the teachers are there. Sometimes the teachers are gone. I think the baby house, so there's two different types of orphanages. There's the baby house, which is the 0 to 5-year-olds, and then the regular orphanage, which is 6 to 15-year-olds. I think the baby house was evacuated right when this started, but they didn't directly evacuate the big kids. There's really nowhere for them to go anyway. There's so many orphans in Ukraine and really nowhere to put them. So I've been collecting donations for Kola directly, but also the hosting groups that brought these kids over have direct connections to the orphanages where they're from. So many of the hosting groups are collecting money direct cash to help feed the orphans, because wherever they are holed up, there's no more food. It has all started to run out. And this is where it gets really scary, especially for kids. And they have armed everybody, which is a different scenario, and I get it. But that makes it a little scary when you need to go get some food. So we are living moment by moment, watching everything happen. Most of the shooting happens at night, though now that they're in the streets, it's a little bit different. And, you know, all we can do is just pray for Kola and hope that he survives this. And there's no easy way to get him here, even on a tourist visa. He's an adult. And after serving in the Ukrainian military, we couldn't even get him a tourist visa. So he couldn't even visit us as a tourist before this. So I don't know what it would look like after, if he was even able to get anywhere, which currently he can't. I would say I think some of those organizations that you mentioned are wonderful. They are not on the ground. Nobody is on the ground there right now because you can't go in. If they are, they're in Poland, they're in Romania, they're close by, but nobody is going in to help Ukraine. And like, I get it, but you know, Russia has nukes, but Ukraine had nukes too, and they gave them up to have a peaceful existence. And now they don't have any nukes, and they are facing an adversary who does, and the people who are supposed to be having their backs don't. So they are on their own, truly, and it's just horrifying. So that is our update. I'm not sure if anybody has any questions or anything, but if you have any extra good thoughts to send them to the orphans, send them to many of the military members who were at one point orphans, who chose to join to not starve, to not face homelessness, because there was no economy for them otherwise. And, you know, I mean, just the Ukrainian grandmas and grandpas who are taking up arms to do their part for their country. I mean, they're war battled already, especially this region, having gone through it in 2014. But that doesn't mean that it's not absolutely traumatic and horrific right now for them. So thank you.
Sabrina, can you put is there anything you can put in the chat for where we can send donations?
Sure. I can't with the baby right now.
Oh,
but,
I see.
I will try to get some links. There's a couple of hosting groups that have direct, you have to have already had a bank direct, whatever, over there. They have direct banks already set up so they can take cash. So there's a couple of hosting groups that are taking cash, and the money is going directly to feed and hopefully someday, depending on where the orphanage is, be able to evacuate them. But right now it's a grab for food. That's what everybody needs right now. I'll send a link.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sabrina. Thank you. Today, our speaker is Alexandra Chandler. I didn't really know a lot about who this person is because I'm kind of new to Solidarity, but when we brought her name up, folks on the committee got wicked excited. So I'm pretty interested to hear what this woman has to say. This is her bio here. Alexandra co-leads Protect Democracy's elections and voting rights efforts and coordinates staff support for the National Task Force on Election Crises. Previously, Alexandra was a career national security professional for 13 years, including roles at the Office of Naval Intelligence and Office of the Secretary of Defense, where she led the intelligence community analytic effort to disrupt the proliferation of WMD by sea and develop policies to prevent the politicization of intelligence. In 2018, she was the first openly transgender candidate to run for Congress from Massachusetts. So I'll stop sharing now.
Hello, everybody. Good to see many of you again. Good to see some of you for the first time. I'm going to apologize in advance. I woke up this morning with a terrible sore throat, so I've got, I'm no kidding, 2 glasses of water next to me. So I will do my best. Negative COVID test, so thankful for that. Bear with me for a moment. I'm going to actually share slides with you on this to actually do a little bit of the talking for me. So please just hang on for a moment while I do that. And while I do that, I just have to say, Sabrina, just you sharing your experiences, if Sabrina is still on to hear this, but whether or not she's still on to hear this, it was just incredibly powerful as someone who's spent some time working on that part of the world and familiar with that part of the world, but with nothing like the family connections there. And just thank you for that. It was so very powerful. All right. Are you in fact seeing a screen?
Yes.
Slide. Very good. So here to talk to you both about the backsliding that we've seen in voting rights in the country in the last few years, as well as prospectively looking forward to our election in 22 and 24, and to contextualize what's the level of the threat, what can people do, etc. For those who don't know me as well, beyond the bio, what I'll share is I, as mentioned, co-lead this election and voting rights team, and we do a lot in terms of litigation in different states, litigation federally, etc. But I am not a career voting rights or elections person, not a former election official. So much of my career is in analyzing the bad things that can happen to systems and countries and otherwise, which is part of why my focus the last few years has been on this task force for election crises that you're going to hear a lot about, and what the effects of the various laws that we're seeing in so many states and the candidates and officials in so many states who are committing to threaten our elections in a variety of ways, how those threats can play out. What I'll say just to start is part of what I hope to do is, given my profession, which I still think of myself as an intel person in many ways, we have a deserved reputation for being downbeat and pessimistic because we have to study complex systems and see all the ways that they can go wrong. But I just want to say, and this is what I'll pick up on in the first slide. Actually, sorry, the second slide will be a little bit further on, bear with me, but that there is actually reason for hope, and that this is more about prevention and preparation for response and not foregone conclusions. So a little bit about the 2 hats that I'm wearing here. They'll also say that I'm speaking in an individual capacity, but what I speak to comes from my experience with these 2 orgs. And you can see that the task force really isn't an org, but a collection of different leaders that have a lot of different perspectives and background. You'll hear about them a bit more on the next slide. And then Protect Democracy, which, well, the words really speak for themselves, don't they? And with that, I want to move over to the task force. And the theme that I've had speaking to different groups, like last few weeks, I've spoken to several indivisible affiliated groups in different parts of the country and otherwise. And a lot of people ask me, like, what gives me hope? I'll say I've the privilege of working with this group of people, this task force gives me hope. Because if you look at, excuse me, that's far through. If you look at this group of people where you see on the right, selected members, you have people like former Secretary Chertoff, who was one of the main proponents of the Patriot Act when it came out, next to people like Cheryl Eiffel of the NAACP LDF. And then you have former election officials, you have Federalist Society professors, you have vote by mail advocates that all at least agree on a certain common denominator of a free, fair, and safe election. And they convened in 2019, worked through the 2020 election, stuck together through that election, and are in it for 22 and 24. So if such a collection of people can do that, that's something to be hopeful right there. What I'll say that they did in 2020 was to help a lot of the election officials at the time and decision makers roll out policies to respond to COVID. And then as the election got closer, again, as you can see some of the slide, dealing with really a lot of shaping of what you saw in the media around expectations of how the election will play out. And I'll keep coming back to the media because we see that as key, even in a fragmented media landscape, to manage expectations Things like it's not election day, it's election week, it's election season. Things like the blue shift and the red mirage, which really weren't understood broadly before groups like this and otherwise intervened, and a lot of private conversations in terms of members of Congress and otherwise, starting back in the spring of 20, saying things like this Electoral Count Act, it's very esoteric and bizarre and weirdly written, and we're sorry to tell you it's likely to be a vulnerability later. So that helped people prepare and get ready for when it in fact turned out to be a vulnerability. What I'm going to try to emphasize is that there is this high risk, but we can prepare, we can mitigate risk. There are particular things that we can do and where we concentrate our efforts, just we, the collective pro-democracy space writ large. My organization supports a variety of federal election and voting rights reforms, including the Freedom to Vote John R. Lewis Act and its ancestor bills. I will also be the first to tell you that the realistic path doesn't look so good. There, you saw, all of you, what happened with filibuster vote. It's not, there really isn't a path at this point, but there might be some small gains that can be made, and that doesn't mean that the game is up. Far from it. It's just the game is really going to be state and local. And then what I'll also say, this isn't so much an action item for you all, but just to know about that one of the things that you'll want to watch for and see how this is coming together as the elections get closer in 22 and 24. Do you have the same kind of unlikely partnerships that we saw in 20 that had such great effect? Like you can think back and sometimes we can forget, and I'll get to this a little in the next slide. January 6th kind of overwhelms all, but in the run up to that, you had groups like the AFL-CIO and the Business Roundtable and Chamber of Commerce coming together with statements recognizing Biden as the winner, things like that we need to be able to replicate that despite all the countervailing pressures going into 22, but particularly 24, to really enforce certain red lines for democracy. I'm going to go through this very quickly. This is kind of obvious to people that are closer to this, but one thing that I want to hit on, because it is a theme that I mentioned earlier and come back to, is shaping the information landscape. And we're following Ukraine right now as well, which obviously is all about an information landscape. In 2020, in the run-up to the election, there was a lot of expectation management that had to be done. But then on election night, what we really saw, people looking at this, myself and others see as a decisive moment, was when, of all places, Fox News, which now, granted, there's OAN and others that are further out in that media ecosystem, but when the Fox News decision desk called Arizona for Biden, and there was this big negative reaction from the Trump campaign, as well as some private entreaties from Kushner and Trump, potentially Trump himself and others, to change the call. And yet the head of the decision desk dragged on there by the anchors to answer for the call and defended the call under fire, saying, this is the right call, this is what has happened. We saw that as decisive, because then when Trump later on that night went out with the, and by the way, we did win this election statement, it was already, the landscape was already altered to the effect that outside of a core hardcore group of Trump supporters, no one was going to believe that when Fox News itself had made that call. So we see that as the sort of thing that kind of profile and courage, whether from the media, whether from, and we'll get to some of what needs to be done in a bit, from state legislatures and state and local canvassing boards, those Republicans or Republican affiliated groups or leaders that can speak up at a critical moment, that will make a lot of difference. It was also, there's some spin up a few months after the election when it seemed that Aaron Mishkin is the name of the head of the decision desk at the time, and personnel had been told that they would not be needed for future elections or for future calls of that nature. But in recent months, there's reporting that actually he's going to be back at the decision desk for 22 and for 24. So we find that encouraging. Now, moving on from things that are somewhat encouraging two things that are just mostly quite bad. When you look at what has happened in the states over this last year, it is really devastating. We at Protect Democracy, with a partner org, States United Democracy Center, we looked at bills that fell into one of three different categories, where there is either legislative seizure of election oversight, or legislative meddling in election minutia, or outright ability legislatively to overturn the results of an election, in three different categories. And we found that there were 262 bills, at least, depending on how you categorize a few edge cases, that fell into at least one of those three categories. And some fell into multiple categories, notable ones like Texas's SB1, a few other really terrible cases. So that was really bad. And it was really bad that 32 of those passed in 17 states. Now, that's 32 out of 262, but that's still really bad and has remade the landscape, and those are kind of facts on the ground that have to be dealt with. Election officials, I can't tell you how painful it's been to have actually spoken with so many of them that have gotten threats that have come into both them, their families, and otherwise. And so few of them are actually can give rise to a cause of action in the courts, something that, candidly, speaking individually, our organization and others are very interested in representing them when we can. But what we have been pleased to see is that a DOJ election task force that spun up some months ago in the late summer, after bluntly not really doing much for a few months, has actually started to take some action. And we hope to encourage more of that. The audits, I mean, so-called audits, partisan election reviews, really, that has been a feature of the landscape. And we do think that that's going to persist. And not to just run through everything here, I'll say, of course, legislatively, big disappointments for FTV, Freedom to Vote Act, and really not seeing much potential for voting rights at the federal level at all. But we'll get a little bit more to some predictions and possible glimmers of hope, both for some tinkering at the edges and the Electoral Count Act in terms of the look ahead at 22. But on a high note, we have a number of experts in political violence in the task force. And even before January 6th had happened, we really did think that 22 would involve more political violence this year than there has been. It has frankly been less than many of us had thought. So that is something encouraging, though past performance does not guarantee future performance. 22, and this is where we're going to get closer to actions that you can potentially take. A big issue that we see is the conspiracy theorist candidate / election denier candidate. And the next three slides that I'm going to show you, partner organization I mentioned, States United Democracy Center, looked at different races where the office, and these are basically constitutional offices at the state level, secretaries of state, attorney general, governor, where you have a candidate running for one of those offices, or more than one candidate, in the case of some crowded Republican primaries, who either outright denies the result of the 2020 election, calling for certification reviews or revoking certification, or otherwise never-ending audits of the election results. You probably are having some trouble seeing the small print here. And what I'll just sum up is this: the darkest purple or magenta or whatever, how that appears in your screen, those are cases where you have such candidates running. The lighter purplish, magenta-ish color are ones where there are races this year and there are no such candidates running. What you will see, sadly, is that there are some states, Wisconsin, for instance, and Arizona, for instance, where you have candidates for those, oh, not Wisconsin, Arizona is the one that has all three, for Secretary of State, Attorney General, and Governor, that have all election denier candidates for all the constitutional offices running. So when we talk about actions that we can take within states that can make a difference, given how the landscape has been altered by these bills. Maps like this can be a guide of where the action might be most impactful, because granted, there are competing factors that can garner your attention. There's the outcome of control for Congress in 22 and 24. But I will say, speaking as an individual, that when you look at these races and you look at the stakes for 24, the winners of these races will make the decisions on whether actual results hold in 24. So that is a big concern on my mind, and I would commend it to your interest as well. What I'll say that I like to call this the abridged what we don't know slide, because we have to look at the future with some humility, as recent events and just the events of the last few years, given COVID and everything else, tell us. We don't know how many more of those laws that meet the different criteria that I mentioned before in terms of legislative meddling in the minutia of elections versus full on being able to overturn results, how many of those will pass? Again, the ratio was not as bad as it could be, but let's see, 17 states is already pretty bad. So we really do want to focus our efforts on prevention there. What I'll say about 22 as well, again, you can read other bullets here, is if you think about some recent notable elections, and something good that did happen here, is that you had McAuliffe in Virginia and the Republican nominee for governor in New Jersey both concede their elections in relatively short order after it became clear that even the kind of standard legal claims and recounts, et cetera, would not play out for them and not change the outcome. One thing that I will be watching very closely is in 22, both the primaries to some extent on the Republican side, as well as the general election, how many truly contested post-election periods do we have? Is it a handful or is it dozens? Because that will augur in one way or another for 2024. And then this wild cards bullet at the end, I used to have war just as kind of a standalone to start with, but it really just deserves emphasis in the last few weeks. And then otherwise, what I'd say is that we can always dwell on sort of, not to overuse the war metaphor, but the last war and the last election. I could see an incredible potential for foreign interference in the 22 and even 2024 election, particularly given Russia and Ukraine. But you can also see, just again, moving beyond the current moment, what's happening with China and Taiwan when we get to 24. And how does all of that play out? Not to mention third parties that just want to inject utter chaos for whatever aim. And with all of the partisan election reviews / quote unquote audits, there's been a lot of source code and other material that can help certain actors exploit certain vulnerabilities in systems. So that's something that the task force and I are particularly concerned about. I've brought you down quite a bit in what I've said. So I'm gonna now try to bring you up a little bit with a few things. Thinking back to the sort of stream of bad news in terms of not just the federal level freedom to vote on the Lewis Act, but drop boxes have recently been banned again in Wisconsin. You saw the terrible bill in Georgia, Texas. This is all very disappointing. And it can be both true that this is all happening, and this is going to have the effect of suppressing the vote of Black and brown people, people of certain politics, young people disproportionately, and that the trend is dangerous for democracy. That can both be true, and yet it is also true that the right to vote is far from lost at the same time. During the pandemic, the improvements in early voting periods, expansion, like drop boxes where we never had it before. I mean, excuse me, even in Massachusetts, if you think about no excuse absentee, Massachusetts has really historically just not been great, and we're still not as great as we could be when it comes to access to vote. And then in states like Kentucky, where even though they now, because of the bill that instituted certain changes post-pandemic, they don't have what they got during the pandemic, but relative to where they were before the pandemic in terms of expansion of early voting, an online portal for requesting an absentee ballot, a voting system that guarantees a paper trail. I mean, there's progress. So in many states, not all, but many, it is easier to vote now than in 2018. That is both true, and that there's been huge backsliding since where we were during the height of the pandemic. So that means that in this sense, the conditions are still there in the system for the result that we saw in 2018, which was, of course, massive change in Congress, considerable change in state legislatures. That is by no means a prediction that we're going to have that again, but it is structurally possible to have that. Of course, the key that you need for that is a wave of turnout, because that turnout was the highest in the century. So what I'll say is that if looking forward as activists, so much of what needs to be done for 2022 and 2024 is what has always been needed to be done. Getting people registered to vote, getting people positioned to vote, GOTV. It's in many ways the same game. If you really want to wonk out on elections issues, there's a podcast I highly recommend, and it's High Turnout, Wide Margins. That is not just a catchy title for a podcast, but it is actually what you should try to aim for in this system with all the voter suppression measures and everything that we're seeing in these bills. It really is still quite that simple, along with all of the, frankly, lawsuit and legislative warfare that other parties have to undertake. For you, I really do think that that is still where the game is. Now, the other thing I'll say before I leave this slide here is that because the bills have been passed, even more people have more power to do terrible things in our election system, where you have state legislators that have granted themselves power that they did not have given secretaries of state that are in office of their own party powers to interfere that they did not have. They still do have to use those powers. And again, as we saw in 20, the states that had the higher margins of victory were states that tended to be ones where it was more difficult for the individuals in the position to interfere to actually interfere because the numbers were clearer. That will not stop. I mean, the widest of victories, there are conspiracy theorists out there that think that Trump won California. There's a certain subset of people you will never convince. However, it's the matter of not just even convincing those partisan politicians, but convincing their big donors that can then get privately leaned on to say, look, I know that you actually have the power to overturn this election, but you just really can't because we're not going to have it. So you're not going to have it because money does still rule. This is the last slide. I'm sharing the whole picture here. This is not your laundry list. The task force that I spoke of has all of these reform and prevention recommendations, and a lot of it, I'll be blunt, is very blue sky thinking in terms of all the things that should be done. Everything from very technocratic fixes in terms of ballot tracking to big things like accountability for January 6th, protecting election officials in a dozen different ways. We and other groups are going to be advocating for that in states and federally, et cetera. The civil society partnerships that I mentioned, the kind of unlikely allies, we and others are going to be at that. And particularly what we're going to try to do within the states is focus on the election interference bills and trying to exploit, bluntly, the divisions that are there in terms of those that on the conservative Republican side that know that they have to do certain things in terms of the election space to garner support just to barely get reelected, but they don't want to actually overturn democracy. So finding the ways where there's this bidding war in some states in terms of 10, 20 different election bills on the Republican side and trying to get, well, frankly, none of them passed, but that even if one is going to get out, making sure that it's not one of the harsher ones and finding the coalition that can kind of steer things in that direction and helping those that would do that. And really trying to use that to cultivate the profiles and courage that we'll need. The Aaron Van Langevelds of the Michigan Board of Canvassers and other people who never wanted to be heroes in any way for democracy, but in that one moment, they do that. Making sure that we position as many people as possible in as many states as possible to do that for us. So for you, zeroing in on just a few things, being very careful that I cannot speak for Protect Democracy when it comes to supporting particular candidates and getting involved in particular states and particular races. But the maps you saw earlier, that is a heat map of potential interference in 2024. So I commend those to your analysis in terms of things like good old postcarding efforts and other such ways to get involved in those states. I'll say that we also, because we're so close to New Hampshire, we have some close to home opportunities. There's a House Bill 1567, though I haven't checked on where it is in the last week because I've been out. But that would, for instance, allow any registered New Hampshire voter to sue to have an election official removed. And then another provision that would allow the New Hampshire Senate to go to New Hampshire Supreme Court to overturn the state's results in an election. These are things that you may have some ability to work on, particularly New Hampshire members of the group. And then the other thing that I'll say is if you haven't gotten involved in election protection work before, the actual Election Protection Coalition, 1866 Our Vote, which is run by the Lawyers Committee on Civil Rights, that is a tremendous organization. They do remote opportunities in the run-up to federal elections, ways to do very structured social media monitoring, intake for complaints of interference in the right to vote. So that's another way to get involved because we are Massachusetts. Our election is not likely to be interfered with in 22 or 24, but we want to help where they are going to be. I'm going to sip some water and await any questions that you have. Thank you for listening.
Hi, Alex.
Hi, Lauren.
I just wanted to say thank you for that. And I haven't seen you for a while, so I wanted to say hi. I don't have any questions. I just want to say I'm very proud of you for doing such great work.
Alex, it's Ron.
Hi, Ron.
Hey, is this slide deck available?
I would rather not, just in terms of lack of context when it's spoken to versus just standalone. But what I am going to do is I'll send Lisa, or I might even be able to quick scrunch it up now. The maps that are referred to is from the Replacing the Refs report from our colleagues at States United. So I will actually, while I wait for other questions, I will put that into the chat for you. One thing that I'll say, and I'll just kind of pose this as a possible question that you might have because some other groups have asked. I can talk a little bit about the whole post-freedom to vote possibilities at the federal level. The Electoral Count Act is something that people have expressed some interest in. If you want, I can go into that. I cannot. as you wish.
I think Rick had his hand up.
Oh, I'm not seeing hands on my side. Rick? Hi,
Hi.
yes, visually see your hand.
This is off topic, but I was wondering if you are able to give us your insights on what's going on in Ukraine.
I was counting the seconds till someone brought that up.
I mean, it's of course bad. What I will say is that such contacts that I have in government and my own sort of look from not too far outside of it is the Russians, I am absolutely certain, really did expect that they would be in a much better position by now. And there's a certain amount of, I wouldn't say rookie mistakes, but kind of like that even if this was planned for some time, that things in terms of like the position of their logistics and having the right amount of fuel, having the right amount of food, it was just a lot of hubris in their planning that, oh yeah, we're going to be in Kiev in 2 days and we'll have Kharkiv and we'll have this. So there's that. Now, I will say that Putin has given himself, because of the rhetoric before the invasion, he has a number of off-ramps, because remember that for him, all of this is about protecting the rights of Russian speakers, particularly in the so-called Donbass People's Republics. So he can stop at any time and just say, well, Ukraine is sufficiently denazified and is sufficiently demilitarized, and now the People's Republics are fine. That is all. I won. See, I won. So granted, this would still be a terrible result if he pulls his forces back to just those People's Republics and people in places like Mariupol and others, depending on where they pull back to, living under Russian rule when they don't want to. That is terrible. But I'll say that there are off-ramps that are possible. It is not all or nothing. And yet it may also just grind on and grind on. I don't have a specific prediction to make, but one thing that I do want to emphasize, like, what do I think? It's that look at the off-ramps. I will be much more worried if Putin starts talking about things more in an all or nothing sense. In terms of things that he's talking about, I'll also say this. I know a lot of people have gotten very worried about the special alert for the strategic nuclear forces today. Remember that that is in part from a place of weakness, and that he only has so many cards. He's used his big card. It's called the Russian army. He has that, and he has cyber attacks, and he has nuclear weapons. That is all he has. So I wouldn't overread too much into that. It doesn't serve his aims. And key, China wants no part of a nuclear conflict over in Ukraine. And he needs China. He absolutely needs China for whatever off-ramp, whatever scenario he envisions. And I do think he is still a rational actor. I think he is a rational actor that overweights certain considerations, but he is still a rational actor. It was a little bit rambling, but I hope that is helpful.
I also think that he wants the resources of the Ukraine. There aren't many resources left after you use a nuke. So I don't think that's a realistic scenario.
Actually, the way that works is I think I had it all, so it's drive up.
Joe. Hi, Alexandra. Are you surprised by the level of unity within NATO and around the world in response to this?
The only one that really, I mean, not entirely, in that, frankly, the Russians doing this in our age of social media, and the Ukrainians just being amazingly good at strategic communications. It's no surprise that the reaction is what it's been. The extent, in a few cases, has been notable to me. When Germany today announced that 100 billion euro one-time investment and meeting, I see you, Chris, that they're going to meet their defense commitments. Like, I have been in rooms discussing like relative defense commitments and like that unbelievable. And the whole Ostpolitik, like this is like an entire just 180 in terms of foreign policy. I can't like overstate that. So that is the one thing. And what I'll say too, though, is that a lot of these measures, they take time, you know, like on one hand, like, yes, that's great, but people have to be prepared that soon you're going to run out of different things to do. And it's just these things have got to take. Like that if in the next few days or next week, it's like, well, why aren't they doing more? Why aren't they doing more? They've done the things. Now they've got to be set in motion and they've got to have their impact.
Lisa?
Lisa.
To bring the conversation back to the voting rights, you sort of alluded to the media having a part, and every time I see news reports, media, I feel like the media did not do our country any favors in the way that they reported things, and I don't feel like they're that much better now. I mean, how much of a threat is our own media to our own democracy and voting rights in the future?
I might be a bit more optimistic there in that what I am seeing more of, again, they're not all the way there yet, and it's definitely uneven in the landscape, is covering things, even campaigns, not just in a partisan horse race kind of lens, but in a, wow, that candidate says X, Y, that is just outside of what is acceptable in a democratic system. That is not partisan politics. That is someone who wants something other than democracy, and covering it that way to really do a bit of shaming and a bit of avoiding the both sidesism that we've seen all too much of. I do think there's been progress there. I think on the social media side, kind of intermixed with media, you see certain platforms, and I want to be cautious not to like name names, but there have been some that have been more receptive than others in terms of changes to algorithms, things like virality breaks in certain conditions. There are a number of organizations, my own included, that are advocating for that to just be all the time, rather than just in the run up to elections, and kind of changing how things like sentiment analysis, you know, are you making people angry? That should not be accelerating presence and reach on platforms, things like that, and the screening of content. That's all gotten better, but it's just not where it should be. I'll also say things like elevating content from trusted sources. That really has improved, like, measurably, quantitatively, but not enough. So I do think that our own media landscape is improving. I don't think that it's actually hurting right now. I think what is hurting more is just, frankly, the potential for disinformation to spread on social media. I blame that more than I blame the media coverage itself.
Thank you.
I see a hand from you.
So if we've heard the former guy say that the invasion of Ukraine wouldn't have happened under his watch, how much of what has happened now is a result of our failure to address the Russian interference in our election, making Putin feel more empowered to do things because we're not going to touch him?
I'm going to take the very rare step of agreeing with Prime Minister Boris Johnson. I think at a certain level, Putin was going to do this. This was a legacy thing for him. It was a matter of timing more than anything else.
Okay.
And I think that the closest thing that I could come to like a timeline where he didn't do this would be, and I'm not saying that we should have made different choices. I don't think we should have, but NATO expansion in the late 90s. I think that once we had taken that path, it was a matter of, okay, there's too much of a threat that Ukraine could make that choice. I can't allow that. So that was like a break in time. And then when the Revolution of Dignity and the Euromaidan, those two were breaks where it could have been otherwise. I really don't think that our own actions, like that can be very understandable, but a certain amount of American centricism, I really don't think that would have changed it,
Okay,
sadly.
thank you.
Anything else on the election side? Like a lot of it really does distill to, there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of possibilities for election crisis. But for those of us that are engaged in the grassroots, it's register people to vote and really think hard about state legislatures and secretaries of state and attorney general and governor's races in certain states. Like that sums up 20 minutes. If you were nothing else, like that's what I would prioritize. I wouldn't say like give up on Congress, even as an individual, but maybe think about it. I am person. Let's do this.
Do we have other questions for Alexandra? I don't see anybody. Oh, there you go, Joseph. Go ahead, Joe.
Alexander, going forward from here, if there's other stuff that comes up for action items, can you keep in touch?
I'm not far away either in my heart or geographically. So really just anytime. And just email me. Like it's alexandra.chandler@gmail. I'm easy to find, or like half of you are my Facebook friends. Just message me. It can be slow because kind of pulled in a lot of directions, but I will get to it. And then if I don't, just pester me until I do.
There are certainly people here who are interested in doing democracy work, and we just kind of need marching orders.
I appreciate that. I just want to say though, and this kind of goes back to my emphasis that there's so much where it's like, oh my gosh, what is my role in fixing the Electoral Count Act? And it's like, you don't have one, and that's okay. Like let the bipartisan gang come up with what it can come up with, and then groups like ours can helpfully nudge them to not come up with something useless. And that kind of thing will play out. But it's, again, register people to vote, get them out to vote. And it's a matter of getting them out to vote in the right places. And that is the best thing you can probably do for democracy in this particular moment, probably, until things change. And then it is something else. But right now, that is what I would say. Any other questions? Or again, Ukraine, election crises.
I have another Ukraine question.
Go ahead, Joe.
Especially given your background, this is something that I'd be very interested in your take on. The intelligence community has been getting a lot of credit for allowing Biden to be, a step ahead of what Putin was going to do and not be surprised by things and be able to call it out. What do you think of that take?
Got a lot of bias here, but I think that's a pretty good take. In that they did get this. They were on money. What is good here, and I have certain former colleagues that would disagree with this, and I know the long-term issues when it comes to sources and methods, but it's when you have a situation like this and the attack is coming, and per what I said, that really there isn't going to be a deterrence or cost that you can inflict that is going to stop them from doing something. The only thing you can do is to try to shape the information environment so that then it creates the conditions where you get Germany and others to move so far, so fast, because there's no false flags, no pretext, no whataboutism, no, well, what if we had done this or what if we had done that? you shape the environment that way. And that is worth burning sources. That is worth putting people at risk, because otherwise you shouldn't be playing this game. You shouldn't be in this profession. So I'm glad that the IC didn't, like, such as they can push, but they take their orders from policymakers, but they went this direction. Yeah, I think it's a good take.
We good? I have a feeling that we would just like to listen to you for a really lot longer, but we can't. We have to be official. And so now I know why they were so hot to hear you talk.
I'm going to apologize because I'm feeling miserable. So like, this is not me at like 50%. So I apologize if I'm a little all over, but I hope that I've helped in some way.
Let me go back to sharing my screen here. There we go. So our next meeting is March 27th. We're going to prep for the upcoming elections, Solidarity elections, and other stuff, I guess, to be determined. And I wanted to find out who would help us with reminder calls and texts.
And this is usually my cue because I sent out the reminder text and links. It's really, really easy to do. All you have to be able to do is copy and paste and send that to about 8 to 10 different phone numbers, which are provided to you. No thinking required. So anybody who would like to help out with that, the more hands, the easier it is. Okay, don't see anybody. I guess the same old gang is gonna have to do it again. But if you feel like you want to do that, contact me, chris@solidaritylowell.com, email me, message me, text me, any which way.
And these are all the many places that you can join us online. We have a Facebook page, we have a public one, and we have a private one. We're on Slack, we have a website, we're on Instagram, and we're on Twitter as well. And thank you for attending. Let me stop sharing now.
Night, everyone.
Night. Good night, everyone.
Night.
Good night.
Everyone.
Great meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Stop recording, Chris.